Hi and welcome to episode 31 of Peace Matters, a podcast on contemporary geopolitics and international relations. Today we focus on Turkish foreign policy. What are its core principles and what drives its actions on the international stage? We also unpack some recent developments, including the dissolution of the Kurdish Workers Party, PKK, and the arrest of Istanbul's mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu. These events actually show that in Turkey, foreign policy cannot be separated from domestic politics. And so in this episode, we discuss both. I'm joined by Cengiz Günay, director of the Austrian Institute for International Affairs, and Sabine Kroissenbrunner, Secretary General of the Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue, political scientist, and Austrian diplomat. We're grateful to the Future Fund of the Republic of Austria for sponsoring this episode. Maybe for the beginning, I want to ask you some general questions about maybe approaches of Turkey to foreign policy and to its neighborhood. Yeah, there has been this motto of the current Turkish leadership, the current party in power, AKP, and the Turkish president of zero problems with neighbors. Yeah, and this was the motto of Turkish foreign policy. But lately, somehow, I feel that Turkey became much more assertive. It's in the way it conducts its foreign policy. So my question maybe is whether it really applies still, this idea of zero problems with neighbors, or has there been some reassessment of that? Cengiz, maybe we'll start with you.
Okay, so zero problems with neighbors was a slogan that was put forward by Ahmet Davutoğlu. It's been a long time ago. He even left the party and established his own party. But he was the, if you like, architect of the early foreign policy conceptions of the AKP. And at that time, it was very much driven by the idea that the stronger Turkey becomes in its neighborhood, the more leverage it gets in the West. So that, and he called it the arrow and bow concept in his book. So at that time, there was still, if you like, a kind of vision or at least idea that Turkey could get a bigger role in the West. So it was very much based on the conception that the West is still the leading power in the world. And I think this has gone. Meanwhile, also, of course, in the neighborhood, some bigger events took place, such as the uprisings of the Arab Spring, and in reaction to these events in Turkey's immediate neighborhood, the Turkish government also changed its foreign policy towards neighboring countries. And the most prominent example is Syria, of course, where it took a very confrontational course and against the Assad regime and sided with the opposition. By the way, this is also describing, it's not only limited to the example of Syria, it's also describing the change in Turkish foreign policy in reaction to the Arab Spring, to the events in course of the Arab Spring. Turkey abandoned its tradition of non-interference in politics in the Middle East. It abandoned its, if you like, neutral standpoint and also the zero problems politics, and rather adopted a policy that can be described as a partisan foreign policy. It sided with certain groups within these countries, which the Turkish government regarded as potential or natural allies, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance. That was the case for Syria, it was the case for Egypt, but it was also the case, if you like, in regard to Tunisia. And the Turkish government and the AKP positioned themselves as a vanguard in that sector, if you like, and as a model for these newly established parties that were a part of the Muslim Brotherhood in its different variations, if you like, and tried to increase its regional leverage through these political parties. Of course, that was not to the liking of other political groups, and actually it backfired because there was this very wrong assumption that these were the forces of the future in the region. So the Turkish foreign policy was strongly building on future collaborations with the Muslim Brotherhood in its different variations within the different countries. It turned out to be wrong. There was a military coup in Egypt. There was, with a time difference, but also Ennahda in Tunisia was removed, and in Syria, for a long time, there was a protracted conflict. I mean, we've seen now more recently changes, but it turned out to be wrong to play or to put everything, to bet on the wrong horse, if you like, and that was the wrong horse. And Turkey became seen as a partisan force, and also it led to a worsening in relations with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, of course also Egypt with the al-Sisi regime, and it put Turkey in a certain corner. I mean, now the Turkish government has tried to overcome this and to reopen or revive relations with different countries, such as Egypt, for instance. And now kind of it's trying to find back to a new role in the region, and here of course the events in Syria play a big role, but maybe we can touch upon it a bit later. Yeah,
discuss Syria a bit later, but thank you very much for this very interesting introduction, because if like Arab Spring was this turning point, as you were saying, and if I understand correctly, Erdogan himself, when he came to power, he came on a democratic ticket, no? And was a promoter of European Union integration. Arab Spring was also a series of democratic uprisings around the region, and just interesting to observe how quickly it may all turn around, in a very, like in a second, just circumstances change and then you completely change your approach. So Sabine, maybe my question to you would be also how much Turkey's foreign policy is based maybe on some sort of an ideology. Some call it neo-Ottomanism, referring to ideas of restoring maybe some Ottoman Empire, so former predecessor of Turkey, or is it more of a pragmatic, realpolitik approach that the current leadership is taking all around its neighborhood, but maybe primarily in the Middle East, since we already started speaking about it?
Yeah, thank you first for the invitation. And I would say these terms you just mentioned are more probably feeding into the way European or Western powers, or also even political scientists, try to read Turkey. But I come back to this neo-Ottomanism, which I don't think has really great value in analyzing Turkey, with one exception. Is not really a good concept to look at Turkey. But maybe what Cengiz said, following up on this, I think it's very important to understand that with the founder of the Republic, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, and what you said, Cengiz, is that this was actually a kind of a policy that was dealing with the ambition of not only non-interference, but it was like peace at home and peace in the world. Okay, so this was actually at the basis, and we saw, as already mentioned, we saw Turkey actually non-interfering, even kind of ignoring the rest of its Arab neighbors to a certain extent. And of course, it's easier to make an analysis when you look back, but my personal reading, or I think also of others, is that this zero problem policy of Ahmet Davutoğlu, who actually himself, he was a political scientist, not a very acknowledged one. He, of course, became a foreign minister, but then he was toppled, so to say. He was even made prime minister, but then, so to speak, toppled by Erdogan. It's a kind of Trump policy making at an early stage, but what he was allowed to come up was indeed this kind of zero problem policy with the neighbors. And if we look at it very closely, he had mainly two, but maybe also three areas on his agenda, and this was Armenia. This didn't work. apart from a very, so in 2008-9, it started with a kind of football diplomacy, but by the end, let's put it that way, 2014, the only thing Erdogan could say was that he was sorry about sad events, right, referring to the genocide or to the massive killings during the reign of the Ottoman Empire. So this was not a policy that succeeded. The second, I think, policy which is usually assumed under this zero problem policy is related to the Kurds, also in the neighborhood, but of course also in Turkey. And also this policy has, of course, we can also go into detail, but it also relates to the time period I was serving in Turkey. So starting 2011, when Erdogan declared that he would now try to find a solution for the Kurdish question. Secondly, he came up and kind of admitting that he had met Öcalan, actually a very interesting up to now.
You're now referring to the leader of the
PKK,
Kurdish
yes,
Workers' Party.
Right? Exactly. A Stalinist group listed as a terrorist organization in the European Union. But of course, one could also have a different reading in terms of fighting for the rights of the Kurdish population. But to sum up, this initiative, in a way, brought a number of also of legal, of law changes in law, allowing Turkish politicians, Turkish policymakers to deal or to negotiate or to meet at least with Kurdish representatives and so on and so forth. But over all these years, what we also could see in 2015, kind of this process was again over. So what's happening now? We can go back to this maybe. We can come back to this maybe later. But this also actually brings me to the backward analysis that Öcalan, was he a political prisoner or was he actually a hostage? Because this the Kurdish peace process, so to speak, trying to find a solution, also based on this zero problem strategy, was of course indeed taking hostage a whole bunch of political issues, with which the Turkey could get or try to gain leverage on the European Union. So whenever something was needed, whenever more political support or financial support seemed to be needed, then the Kurdish question came up and would be close to a solution, but that never happened. So I think it's a great myth to talk about this zero problem policy with its neighbors. The second thing, I think, what we can say about Turkish foreign policy is that it's, of course, very closely related to, and this is what I try to underline, to the domestic economic and political issues. Whenever economics got worse, the economic situation got worse, or political protests arose, like the Gezi Park protests in 2013, and so on and so forth, then we can see that Turkish foreign policy efforts mainly related also to military engagement. It's not breaking a war from there, but getting into Syria, in the northern Syria, going to Libya, sending sort of soldiers, even there, deploying military equipment, doing military deals these days up to Africa, because Turkey also had an African strategy, of course. So this is very important to see that these economic and political internal problems made Turkey shaped Turkey's foreign policy. And the fourth aspect to this, I would say, you also mentioned this, is related to Erdogan as the president of Erdogan. It's not Turkey, it's this government and this president, in my reading, has never been in favor of the European Union or Turkey joining the European Union or making Turkey a democratic, liberal, secular state, but using some of these political leverages to enhance the strategic position for gaining financial support when needed. And I think the ideological component, in my eyes, is indeed unfortunately, a very Islamistic one. So Erdogan, in my eyes, the president, even when he was, especially when he was a mayor of Istanbul, even then, and it's of course very famous what he said at that time, democracy is like a tramway. At the last station, when we come to the last station, we get out first. Second saying for which he was actually also imprisoned, and this is an important point maybe in relation to today, when he was imprisoned because of restating kind of nationalist poem, where the minarets are the bayonets of his policies. So
of the nation.
Of the nation, yeah, sorry, thank you. So when he was imprisoned, at that time, being the mayor of Istanbul, Green party politician Claudia Roth came to visit, and he was allowed to visit him. Now we have İmamoğlu imprisoned, and when the president of the Party of European Socialists, Stefan Löfven, came with the delegation, he was not even allowed to see İmamoğlu. Not talking about the very fact, which I find very, very important as well, is that not too many others even tried to visit İmamoğlu these days. And so, again, coming back to that, this Islamist agenda, very much supported by the Muslim Brotherhood's discourse, this is something, I think, this is at the core of Erdogan's foreign policy, but it also, of course, is related to how he wants to shape, and has already started to shape and change the democratic or the secular democratic republic of Turkey. Not that democracy has always been established and fine there. And one last thing, the only neo-Ottoman aspect to that, in my eyes, is not what Turkey may try to achieve in the region, right? In the former parts of the Ottoman Empire. The real neo-Ottoman aspect is that now you have the totally presidential system, the Sultanate, trying actually to keep the Diyanet, the Presidency of Religious Affairs, as close as possible, and influencing this Diyanet, making a kind of caliph. Because what was the role of the caliph and the sultan? It was the caliph always following the political lines of the sultanate. But we see the presidency of religious affairs in former days, in its interpretation of Islam, for example, on a kind of more or less independent or different path than we see it under Erdogan. This is the only aspect. So
basically bringing back authoritarianism in a
yes.
legitimizing
authoritarianism through religion.
So Cengiz, I wanted to ask you about this rationale or ratio between the ideology and pragmatism, so to say, or realpolitik in foreign policy specifically. Do you also see that Islamic ideology somehow is very present in Turkey's foreign policy, or is it rather something for domestic consumption?
I agree with the things Sabine just explained. I think that foreign policy, I mean, it's a global phenomenon, that foreign policy has become part of domestic politics. And Tayyip Erdogan is a power politician, and I think his main objective is securing his own power. And he's ready to use any tool that is necessary. So I would say he is, of course, he comes from an ideology and from an ideological movement, and he has an Islamist ideology, even though I have to say Islamism is a huge spectrum, you know. So in that regard, he is a pragmatist and a moderate Islamist and not a hardcore Islamist. And he's ready to give up principles if necessary, because his ultimate goal is to stay in power and implement whatever his ideas are. So, and also foreign policy is a tool for that. And he sees because you previously referred to the neo-Ottoman policies. So in that regard, it is also a deviation, if you like, from classical Islamism, because Islamists wouldn't be very much in favor of the Ottoman Empire. It's a more Turkish nationalist Islamist reading of the Ottoman Empire. as the leading force in the region and beyond. And I think it's therefore a kind of mirage he's also putting out there. And it is understandable for many people, because also the Republic, as you rightly mentioned, cut off the ties not only with the region but also with their own past. And many Turkish citizens feel like, by the way, this is also something I can see in Austria, it's like these previous empires that feel that they actually had a mission and are kind of castrated, if you like, in comparison to their past role. So many people in Turkey would feel like our mission on this planet is bigger than just limited to Turkey and its immediate relations. We are the natural leaders of the region. This doesn't really go with Islamism in that regard, because it puts the Turkish nation above the rest of the Muslim societies and nations in the region. So it is more a nationalist Islamist perspective. Turkish, and he comes from this movement. It's the National Outlook movement that is a Turkish Islamist nationalist movement, if you like. And he uses foreign policy also as a tool for domestic politics. A very good example is, for instance, the crackdown on the Gezi protest in 2013. It really coincided with the military coup in Egypt, and he accused the protesters and anybody who was involved in the protests, Gezi protests in Turkey, of being of trying to overthrow the government through undemocratic ways, which is an interesting twist of foreign policy, of developments elsewhere, and how it was kind of used as a domestic tool. And it was a strong tool, many people believed, and so he has criminalized people who were involved in the Gezi protests. So he uses foreign policy also for autocratization, and it's a nice, from his perspective, tool to distract people from domestic problems. So I recently, for instance, watched an interesting debate of course it's not on Turkish TV, but it's on, you can follow it on YouTube and elsewhere, because all the critical journalists have had to move there. One commentator said, if you watch the pro-government news, you feel like you're on a different planet. It's like promising that Turkey is the leading nation in the region, and it's shaping the future of Syria and beyond, and it's going to solve the Russia-Ukraine conflict and this and that. And you see how detached this is actually from the current problems in Turkey, where you have a really severe political crisis, because the mayor of Istanbul and the most credible challenger of Erdogan is imprisoned, and there hasn't even been a hearing yet, and you have other political leaders that are imprisoned. You have continuing protest in Turkey, and a growing a huge decrease in the support for the government. So the government is actually in trouble, and you have a deep economic crisis with enormous inflation rates, and people are really struggling in their everyday survivals. So you have here the pro-government media picturing or giving an image of Turkey as being the leading nation, and in the region, and on the other hand, you have huge domestic problems.
Yeah. Wouldn't you say something to this? This is, of course, important, and also sums up using foreign policies and the agenda and this ideology to actually, I would say, to destroy the democratic opposition, no matter what it is, and to also destroy actually the republic, so the state institutions. I keep saying that in a number of countries we observe, actually in the neighborhood of Europe, not only the Trump US administration, you observe state leaders who are leaders to destroy the state. and its functioning, and for what state institutions are here for. But coming also back to this kind of propaganda, it's very easy to read. Of course, Erdogan and his governments, since more or less the first years when they started to reign, have done everything in terms of technology and laws to monopolize the media. Turkey was one of, Turkey has been technologically and in many other ways, in terms of industry, in terms of labor craftsmanship, of many things. I keep saying that's kind of the Germans of Southeastern Europe, right? So in many, many ways, even e-government has been something the Turkish government very, very much advanced, and what you could praise on the one hand, because of course it also brings a number of advantages. It has been turned into a control tool. So I just, and this of course relates also to the human rights record of Turkey. So you, in 2022, you had the disinformation law. Disinformation law, meaning you are able to crack down on everything, on everyone who is not your opinion, apart from the monopolization of the media and of buying and ousting, of buying media channels, of ousting others, of forbidding, of closing down social media channels, sometimes for days. Very important tool, of course. So the disinformation law, the law on cybersecurity. Now we see in 2025 the number of journalists that is basically imprisoned and so on. So a number of course of tools. So again, it comes down to not a pragmatism, realpolitik, or ideology. In my eyes, there's no ideology, but to stay in power, and this, of course, Erdogan shares with a number of other so-called leaders in the region and beyond, to stay in power at any price and use anything and everything, including Islam. That's why I'm not debating religion. I'm debating the many, many tools you use in order to stay and also exercise your influence. And maybe, if I may add, to that, now these days we debate if the influence, for example, that Turkey has on Syria. And the question if the Turkish Islam might be sort of preferable to the upcoming Salafi movements in Syria. This is not the debate. Erdogan doesn't want to sell or to export a more liberal or moderate version of Islam. First of all, he has, among many other interests in Syria, related, of course, to the statehood of Syria, even in relation to the Kurdish north and other groups. He has also enormous economic interests. Because of economic problems inside, we see that the free trade agreement with Syria that was already agreed upon in 2005 had enormous effects, even before everything started, even before the war started, on trade between Syria and Turkey. And today we see Turkey's goods, Turkey's industries, or Turkey's efforts to, of course, exercise control and see an economic advantage. There might be, of course, other advantages also for Syria, but in general, this is also an economic strategy.
Yeah.
And it's not the debate if you are exporting any kind of Islam. This is not what he wants to export, because he's on this ideological path anyhow.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm no Turkey expert, but from what I hear from you, there is this huge domestic crisis on many levels, and the state propaganda that is saying everything is looking great. When I look at Turkey geopolitically, I'm still asking myself, there are lots of opportunities for it right now. You mentioned, of course, that the state propaganda will not say that it will solve now Russia-Ukraine war. Maybe not, but it has a very big role to play there, right? The fall of Assad in December, also huge opportunity for Turkey in terms of, economics, you just mentioned that, in terms of, resolving in any way, I don't know in what way, the Kurdish question, also the dissolution of PKK just days ago. Another thing, so my question is, yes, there are so many troubles and problems, but isn't it, from a geopolitical perspective, a moment for Turkey to actually, where it can enhance its power and where it can actually increase its geopolitical influence? And if yes, what does it mean for its neighborhood and maybe also for us in the West? I actually also had a question on the relations with the West, but maybe we will not go there right now, but maybe in principle on this.
So I think the Turkey's geopolitical, geostrategic position is a chance and a curse at the same time. Turkey is at a it's at the crossroads of, or at the board. It borders on many different regions. That has always been the case, also during the Cold War and after the Cold War. And Turkish politicians have always tried to make use of this, of course, and to benefit from it, usually in their negotiations with the West. Nowadays also with others, because the West has lost its hegemonic position. It's a chance because Turkey has benefited in the past, a lot from that. I think the perspective of EU accession was due to its geopolitical or geostrategic position, was seen as an important contributor to Europe's security, and was seen as necessary to keep Turkey stable, and stability was thought to be found through democratization. And of course, the Americans played a huge role in that regard, because it was not the European Union that had this strategic vision. It were the Americans who told the Europeans to take Turkey in, because otherwise they were afraid it would kind of drift away and turn to the more to the east. There's also a lot of Orientalist conceptions of Turkey, and that was also part of the debates on Turkish accession, but it was also in negative ways and in positive ways. So in that regard, Turkey maybe benefited. Nowadays, it's also a curse, and it was also in the past sometimes a curse, because it, even in relations with the West, Western partners often overlooked the fact that Turkish democracy was not in a good shape. It was a defect democracy. You had military coups, and that didn't really affect relations with the West. So it wasn't really very principled in that regard. And today, I mean, if you just think of what happened after the arrest of Mayor Imamoğlu, you have very weak voices, be it from the European Union and from the United States. You don't hear anything. So even when there was a first crackdown on the protests in Turkey, President Trump, no, sorry, it wasn't Trump, it was his advisor on the Middle East, who said there are wonderful things coming out of Turkey, which is just a horrible statement, considering that young students were beaten up and so on. And if you look at reactions from within Europe, and particularly also from Austria, and also social democrats, how they react, they are all kind of constrained by the fear that Tayyip Erdogan might be using the migrants card, and so they don't really, because of Turkey's geostrategic position, they're less interested in Turkey's democratization or in supporting the opposition, rather than keeping Turkey now, in contrast to the past, not through democratization, but keeping Turkey stable under even an authoritarian government, and keep that government kind of friendly, if you like, and not provoke it, because there's a fear that Tayyip Erdogan might be using the migrants card. And
this is important in relation to the European Union, because, of course, we will not recall the whole process and its ups and downs and so on, but I think it's very important to see that apart from the lacking support for not only the social democrats in Turkey, but any democratic force, democratic, I underline, because so apart from this being lacking, we also understand that for the European Union and of course Turkey, for both sides, there have been, as I was saying, important trade partners, important economic partners. So that's a given fact. On the other hand, Turkey, compared to other southeastern European states, historically has received only a fracture of financial support from the European Union. Okay? So in, let's say, 100 and something million of euros in terms of supporting the accession process. But what actually made money from the European Union pour into Turkey was the migration deal. So it is by no chance that, that of course, the government and President Erdogan understood very well that this is the card they could play. If this is a card to be played and to be, that it has actually an indeed, I mean, does the Turkish government have indeed a leverage on how many refugees from Turkey would pour into Europe or not? This is really questionable. And so I think what we can say is that unfortunately, this is my personal opinion, it was also my opinion when I worked as a diplomat, although my government, of course, had a position, a clear position in relation to say, okay, we need to sort of freeze the accession and the accession negotiations with Turkey. I would say that in doing so, the European Union has indeed given up so any leverage on Turkey anymore, leave alone the interest. So what stays is that Turkey has received 6 billion, then 2 billion, then 3 billion of euros to support their whatever policies in relation to the refugees influx, leaving the European Union without any other political leverage, and making also and shaping or making increasing the image of Turkey as being more or less nothing else but a pool where the refugees gather, you know, and this is how we look at Turkey, how European. Let's say, very often look at Turkey. And this is, let's say, a very dangerous limitation to also the other options Europe could have in indeed cooperating with Turkey, but not only, of course, with the government, whom else would you like to go, but also in fostering, again, in supporting democratic forces in Turkey. And this has not been the case. No. Not in terms of... I mean, this little support for NGOs. I mean, this is in comparison to the southeastern European countries and the Western Balkans, very little. And I think this is an important, really point to see.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think a year ago there was an attempt from the European Commission to somehow redefine the relationship with Turkey. I don't know where it went afterwards, if you have any...
Nowhere.
No.
Nowhere.
It wasn't... No. Is it because of lack of consensus among the member states, or
also,
what was
Yes, of course. There is a huge opposition to Turkish, has been throughout history, a huge opposition to Turkey's membership. And it's nothing you can win elections with in Europe. And also the Turkish government has lost interest. And to be honest, not only the government, also the Turkish public doesn't believe anymore. So it's somewhere in between. No one wants to call off this process and admit that it's at a dead end, because we don't have any alternative. There are no constructions how to cooperate with Turkey other than this deal. The migration deal. So I think it's a lack of not only enthusiasm and interest, it's also a lack of innovation, if you like, that is on both sides.
All right. So maybe because you already mentioned so many times the arrest of the Istanbul mayor, where do you see it going? Is there any chance of, I don't know, some more or less, you know, positive outcome that he will be released, or that there will be some fair trial, or should we just, or is there a player who could actually...
Fair trial? No.
Yeah.
I can definitely say...
What could maybe break the current dynamic, because it looks also pretty...
You want to start? Or?
Sad right now for me.
Okay.
I don't know if this is the... I would first say that this is, as I really put it, one more political hostage. So it is, and that meaning that you have someone in prison, you keep him probably there until let's say the government or president's office has a clearer picture of of other developments where they would go. Also with the European Union, but maybe less so with other forces. And I underline this because it's important. We usually talk about political prisoners, which Turkey has for sure, and also of course
a long record.
Yes, a long record. But also in other countries like Russia or other authoritarian states. But I mean, even in Russia, the number of political prisoners is higher than it was under the Soviet Union. And other countries like Egypt and so on. So there is a huge amount of people in prison, most no fair trial. But this is they are hostages taken for other political bargainships. And so now this is one thing. I think it is. I could not say where this will go, but I think it would be very, very important, of course, for the Turkish opposition forces as such to seek greater relations with Europe also. Because not only of course I'm generalizing, but not only that European countries and institutions have ignored them, maybe also vice versa, because under authoritarian government, also the opposition, of course, is basically suffering, is kind of their capacities in many ways decrease, also their financial capacities. Many capacities simply decrease. So I think this is something to look into very closely. Then comes the question: Will President Erdogan try to run once again for the elections? Of course, this is 2028.
I guess this is already settled now. The whole arrest was kind of part of.
Yes, of course, it's part of it. But of course, he would. So he would have to call early elections. But as you said already, the support for the AKP is decreasing, and as opinion polls show, actually the Social Democrats, the CHP, is at this moment of time, obviously let's say would gain more votes. But I would also one last thing is, even if we don't know where this so-called deal with the PKK will go, also this doesn't of course come out of the blue. And as I was trying to say at the very beginning, also this government, this president insinuating, trying to make people believe that he is the one who will solve the so-called Kurdish question, is totally domestic politically driven, and also should serve his purposes of power. So that's why it comes at this point of time. I will be the one who has brought the PKK to lay the arms down, whereas the PKK, as far as I'm reading their statements, is saying, okay, we lay down our arms, but we will keep on our political fight. And there, I think, not to go into detail about this, but there I think this is a crucial aspect in the government of Turkey's consideration what will happen to Syria and the north of Syria. Will Syria stay, let's say, a more or less centralized state, and will it stay as a state as it is, or will the Kurdish region break up? So it is at this moment of time, and also in the upcoming months, it's a good thing to be in good terms with, or basically have a peace deal, so to speak, with the PKK, having their arms laid down. But what does it mean to fight for your political causes? You have Kurdish political parties in Turkey. Yes, unfortunately, very often banned, and of course this is also what makes what destroys democracy. But also having this deal with the PKK, I think, is also related to what Turkey might consider of going on in the future in the north of Syria.
I have 10 seconds left, right?
No, we can say a couple of more words, because I really wanted to discuss this issue.
Yeah.
It came to someone not.
I'll be trying to be brief. I think what we're witnessing currently is a very dramatic moment in Turkish history. It is, as we described, foreign policy making. It is part of securing long-term power. And from the perspective of the president and the palace, this was a big shift in the Turkish political system, away from a parliamentary system to a presidential system with hardly any checks and balances, and where you have now a palace bureaucracy that is shaping basically politics in Turkey, be it foreign policy, and we don't know who these people are. They're not elected, they are advisors to the president. Nobody even knows how many advisors there are in the palace bureaucracy. So, and these people aren't dependent on votes. And they are afraid that if this system is, if Tayyip Erdogan might be losing the next elections, they're also gone, and the entire clientelistic system is gone. So it's about preserving the system, and they're ready to do anything as he is. And so the arrest of İmamoğlu is probably only a first step. They're already also talking about a crackdown on the main opposition party, and there were certain attempts, but I mean, this is the bleak picture. At the same time, Turkey is a very resilient society, and it's not a young democracy in that regard. Turkey has a long history of multi-party politics, of changing governments and of free elections. We just recently had a joint event on the future of Turkish democracy, and what all panelists agreed there is that democratic voting rights are sacred to many Turkish citizens, and even the most ardent supporters of the government aren't willing to see their rights being gone. So there is an ongoing struggle. The question is whether the opposition can keep up this struggle, the fight, and up to which certain point it needs to escalate and then re-normalize. It's really a difficult fight, and and I think we need to look at it the long durée. It's nothing that can be decided within 1 or 2 or 3 weeks. It's really a long fight, and we will see how Tayyip Erdogan will be able to maneuver or not maneuver.
All right. So we started with foreign policy and then we switched to domestic politics. This actually shows how much these two interconnected. And as you rightly say, Cengiz, it's a global phenomenon, but probably in the case of Turkey, it's especially very prominent. Yeah. So thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. It gave me a lot of food for thought, and I think I need to record another 3 episodes at least on Turkey and different regions surrounding it. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode is sponsored by the Future Fund of the Republic of Austria. Thanks for watching and listening.